welcome to Stamping with Gail. In this video, I'm going to show you how to emboss. This is the type of embossing where we use embossing powder and heat it up. There's another type of embossing called dry embossing, but I'm going to save that for another video. So the first thing we need to do is to gather our supplies. So we'll need a rubber stamp, of course. It can be an outline image or a bold image. Almost any stamp will do. We need a stamping ink that stays wet enough, long enough for the embossing powder to stick. It can be a clear ink, such as a Versamark ink pad, or it can be a colored ink, like a Stampin' Up! Craft pad. We're going to use this one today. We need some embossing powder, and I am using Early Espresso, which is a dark brown. And I'm using a colored embossing powder because I'm using a clear ink. If I were using a colored ink, then I could use a clear base powder, one that has sparkles or just plain clear. I also need an embossing buddy, and I'll show you what that's for in a minute. It's just a little bag, like a little resin bag. It's going to help us out. Paintbrush is optional, but I'm going to show you why I like that. And a heat gun, and this is going to provide some heat and melt the embossing powder. And before you even ask, no, you can't use a blow dryer, that won't work. So let's get started with a piece of cardstock. I have a vanilla cardstock here, and I'm taking my embossing buddy and I'm going to just rub it over the surface of the card. This does a couple of things. It takes off any oils that might be on the card, and it also takes any static off. And the reason I do both of those is so that the embossing powder will only stick where I want it to stick, hopefully. So we'll take the stamp and ink it with the Versamark ink, the clear ink. And as you use a Versamark pad, I'll warn you, it doesn't always stay this pretty. This is a new one I opened just for this video, but they do get kind of gray after a while, and that's okay. So I'm just going to stamp my image. You do want to make sure your ink pad is wet enough, so if it needs to be re-inked, that would be a good time to do that. And you can't see it because the ink is clear. I'm just going to get a piece of scratch paper and pour the embossing powder over it. And you know, you can pour the whole jar if you want. It's okay, because we're going to pour it back into the jar when we're done. And then tap off the excess and inspect it, look at it, and see if there's any flecks where you don't want them. If there are, that's a good time to just use that brush and get off any stray flecks that you might see. And then when you're done with that, of course, you do want to save this embossing powder. So pour it back into the jar for another time. And now heat with the heat gun. And you do want to be careful with this. It's very hot. I joked about the hair dryer, but you don't want to use this to blow dry your hair. It can be very dangerous. You want to keep it out of the path of children and cats. Sometimes cats can turn it on, depending on the kind of button it has. So when you're not using it, leave it unplugged. And as the heat gun gets hot, the embossing powder is going to melt and become raised and shiny. And I just hope that you can see that on the video. If you're using a small piece of paper, you might want to hold on to it with a clothespin or some kind of a clip, as long as it's not a metal clip, because that would get hot also. We're just slowly going over the whole thing just to make sure that it's all melted. And when it's all melted, you want to stop. If you overmelt, if you overheat, a couple of things could happen. The paper could catch on fire, or it could scorch. Also, as you overheat embossing powder, it soaks into the paper and it's not raised and shiny anymore. And then you just want to give it a look in the light to make sure that you got the whole thing. If you didn't, go back and reheat. If your paper buckles up and is warped and you want to fix that, just turn it over and heat it a little bit from the back. And that will usually flatten that out. Again, you don't want to overheat it. And that is how you heat emboss. And you can make a pretty little Easter card or Christmas card. I love to emboss at Christmas time. But it's easy. People will be wowed and amazed that you made something so perfect. And then you can just smile and know that it really was pretty easy. So be sure to subscribe to my Stamping with Gail YouTube channel if you aren't a subscriber already. And be sure to check out my blog, www.stampingwithgail.com. Until next time, this is Gail.